your appetite for risk has gone way down, right? Those folks who were in the workforce 9 months ago, they'd seen it, they'd done it, they had an appetite for a little bit of risk. I think now people are adverse to risk, even now more than ever.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Optimize podcast by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Hamm, and today I'm joined with Vaughn Noga, former CIO from the Environmental Protection Agency, somebody that I have crossed paths with. And fun fact about this one, Vaughn got the job that I wanted. When I first started working for the government, I wanted to become a CIO. So my first question for Vaughn's going to be after the intro is like, how do you do that? Because that was like the dream job for me in the 90s. So Vaughn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Chris.
All right, so we crossed paths when you were a contractor, right?
Correct. Back in 2004, I think it was.
Yeah, like early 2000s, in the before times. So tell me about like the start of your career, and like at that time, like was the idea of working for the federal government, and like I don't even CIOs like barely existed at that time. Like was this like in the path? Like how did you get from like I got a good cool job with the company to like being the CIO at EPA?
Yeah, I think the start there at EPA was really I wanted to make a difference. And there's only so much you can do as a contractor working for the government. And so I knew, what I wanted to do was transition to a federal role where I could actually be on the inside and help drive change, substantive change, smart change within IT, within EPA. And so that's kind of led me on my journey to the CIO role. I actually, it's interesting because I started as deputy director for the Office of Technology Operations and Planning, and I ascended into the director role for 4 years, and then I had an opportunity to move off and do something totally different outside of IT, and ran facilities for the EPA for 4 years. But what I found is, IT is pervasive. It's everywhere. It's in every job you do. There's some sort of nexus back to IT. And I found that in facilities, safety, security, personal physical security. And so I was able to identify, things that, if I could transition back into the CIO role that I would fix, right? And so transitioning back into the CIO role was really, sometimes it's dumb luck, is just, you can chalk it up to that. There was an opportunity to, this is during the first Trump administration, to transition back into the role. And people trusted me to do the right thing, and it was a good run for about 7 years as a CIO, and we're able to do a lot of things.
So let's go back to the time when you switched from contractor to being a federal employee. What's the first thing that surprised you when you flipped from like the pressures of working in private industry to like you're now all of a sudden a GS whatever, or you're applying for an SES, and then like it works differently culturally, like the mindset of a civil servant, and then like the way that things work for you in that transition?
Yeah, I mean, certainly on the federal side, it's very structured. As you know, it's very structured. And I think one of the things that I found when I transitioned the role is I started looking for things to do, things to fix, right? And I described this to my team that it's like, picking up rocks. There was a lot of rocks to pick up. And then, before you know it, you find yourself with an armful of rocks and not able to do anything, right? And so, one of the things that I saw was there's really, it's a, I hate to use this phrase, it was a target-rich environment for opportunities to drive modernization or improvement. But I think one of the things I learned very quickly is you have to be very selective, right? You can't get everything done in the first year. You've got to, identify what are those one or two things that you can really sink your teeth in, get them done and move on. I think that's sometimes the challenge, is that because when you transition or people transition to the federal government or they assume a new role, there's so many opportunities, so many things to prove that they kind of get stuck, right? They get stuck with this armful of rocks. And so I encourage when I was in the role, to encourage my folks to just pick one thing and get it done. I think that's the most important thing is to get it done, and then move on to that next thing and get it done. Versus this, perpetual, kicking things down the road, which I've seen a lot of folks, end up doing and not really ever get anything done.
So taking this back to the acquisition context. So like I said, I would have started, I once fancied myself to be an IT person. Then I was disabused of that once I met real IT people. But, you come in and you pick up one of these rocks. You want to change, you want to outsource the mainframe. You want to change the email system. You want to, put endpoint security on stuff. And you run into somebody like me who says, well, you just can't pick. You just can't oh, I like this one software. I've got to do it. Like what was your encounter like with the acquisition system and the rules?
I had a really good relationship with the acquisition folks, certainly on the GSA side. And there's a pivot point there at some point in the future. We talk about my workings with GSA and what my belief on that is. But I really didn't have a challenge. We went through the normal process, and I respected the process. Being a contractor, I understood that you've got to have fair competition in how you're approaching things. I think, as we talk further, that sometimes is the challenge, because certainly with government, as you identify and you pick vendors and then you build your environment around a specific vendor, it becomes increasingly difficult to supplant that vendor. And I know there's a lot of angst within the vendor community about, well, how do I get into this environment, right? And I think there are opportunities for folks to come into an environment that they don't have a presence, but they have to be very smart about it. They have to do their homework. They have to understand that what we're looking for, and certainly when I say we, I don't mean the CIO. I mean the IT, the professional IT folks from the the lowest level up to the highest. We're looking to reduce risk, right? So when you talk about bringing new technology in, certainly there's a risk to the technology, but there's operational risk associated with bringing something new into the environment. What type of churn is happening when you bring this in? I think that's one of the things that may be lost on folks is how much value people place in that risk equation.
Oh yeah, anything new. I mentioned email systems or mainframes, but I've had multiple career government IT people tell me you're going to take the mainframe from my cold dead hand. You're going to take my control over what is known and what the user base is used to, because the modernization window can disrupt the user community for years.
Yeah, for you talked about the mainframe, and we had big iron at EPA. It wasn't there very long, and the nice thing, we also had a working capital fund. So the last person that was using the mainframe, they got stuck with the entire bill. So there was a very big impetus to modernize that application and move it off the mainframe.
You just said magic letters. You just said something that I believe is a foundational principle for effective operations of IT and government. Mm-hmm. And I bet you people outside, industry maybe knows, but the general public does not understand the weirdness of how government funds IT and then how it constricts you. So I know we have this shared experience. You worked in a working capital fund. I worked in something called the Acquisition Services Fund, which is basically your personal revolving checking account with rules. It has the ability to do credits and debits and manage things that you're allowed to make smarter decisions versus this line is only for food. This line is only for water. This line is only the constraints of it. Can you tell me more about the EPA working capital fund environment and how it allowed you to have more freedom for modernization?
Yeah, I walked into it. It wasn't developed underneath Vaughn. It had been something that was built in the 90s and matured over time. And it's something that, WCFs, highly effective, efficient WCFs, they just don't happen, right? People get involved and manage it. And we've got an old colleague, Tom Riley, who did a lot of great work on really managing the working capital fund. But it does give you a huge amount of flexibility on how you modernize. And I like to use the word continuously modernize, right? It's not just a point in time where you modernize and then you wait 5 years and do it again. The WCF allowed us the opportunity, certainly with infrastructure, to make sure that we could modernize infrastructure and then pay back into the fund, have those dollars available when we need to, do another modernization for that infrastructure. It was really important for us, and the effective use of the WCF was really important for how we ran the operations. At that time, the time I left, we have a $200+ million WCF. So we did all IT infrastructure from desktops to or laptops to mobile devices to IT infrastructure to storage to cloud services. Everything, all the services were offered through the WCF. And we were, one of the things that I pushed was, the goal of the WCF every year was either to offer the same service at a lower cost or offer more value in that service, right? And that's one of the things that drove us year on year. And we would do a bottom-up review on the cost associated with it. And then I think about our fund, at least, was that the board members were our regions and programs, right? And so they were able to actually, look at the books, look at what we're doing, look at the service we're providing, and had an opportunity to question and to bring things up. And it sounds, like, oh my gosh, that's how you were able to run that at the EPA. You just didn't get your money and spend the money the way you wanted to. No, we had oversight. And I think it's important to have that oversight because it maintains accountability. And I think that's what's important within these types of funds, if you will, WCF, is to have that oversight and accountability.
So when you went over to facilities, were you still in the working capital fund, or were you then subject to normal appropriations in the dance?
We were subject to normal appropriations. There was a couple things, and I tried to. Again, I look at fixed costs. To me, IT is a fixed cost, right? There's nothing that we do in the federal government, very little that we do in the federal government that doesn't have a nexus back to IT. You should be planning for it. It should be a fixed cost. I use the example like a building system. There's a fixed cost associated with building system. I will say that sometimes those are challenges as well when you defer maintenance, and that's another thing. I guess that's the equivalent of deductible debt when you say deferred maintenance in the facilities parlance. But I tried to get the facilities because there's major building systems that we could have put into the fund. When you have to replace a HVAC or a roof, they have, the fund is nice because you can depreciate over a given period of time. IT's got a depreciation value. An air conditioner and a roof has got a depreciation value too. And wouldn't it be nice to go ahead and pay that down over the 20 years and then be able to replace the roof and not wait for some sort of appropriation to replace a roof? So I think it works in all cases, quite frankly.
So I'm familiar with your model, and I lived in it. The overwhelming majority of the CIOs, like on the CIO council, do not exist in a revolving fund. Did you go to meetings? Did you brag to them? Like, what was the dynamic? And it probably led to like the TMF stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a bragger. I'm my head's down. Let's get it done. Let's focus on EPA. It was unusual, or it was interesting rather, when people would have conversations and I would scratch my head. I'm like, well, we don't have that issue here. We don't have the issue here. And why don't we have those same sorts of issues here? I think a lot of it had to tie back to the WCF. We had that flexibility that we could actually execute without having to worry about some sort of future appropriation to be able to execute within the framework. So I think a lot of the challenges that other CIOs faced, we didn't necessarily face them. Not saying we didn't have our own challenges. We certainly did. But I can remember many occasions scratching my head saying, wow, I'm glad we don't have that problem here at EPA.
Yeah. All right. So let me throw you a random question. This is maybe you might not even have an answer for this one, but we'll see. So a lot of the experience that I had with you was working at the Research Triangle Park, North Carolina location, and I remember at the time that because I went to school in North Carolina, there are divided loyalties. There are 3 principal basketball teams. And you declare your fealty with your clothing, in which whether or not you're in Raleigh, Durham, or Chapel Hill. Which banner did you fly?
I live in Charlottesville, so I didn't fly one of those banners.
Oh, you were a Cavalier.
Yeah.
Oh.
You got to go from home team.
In the old ACC days.
Yeah.
All right. So working as the CIO, so you're in the seat for a while. There are lots and lots of companies that in order to bid on any of your work, they've got to have a meeting with you or somebody in your staff. They've got to do something. They've got to be at a conference. They've got to spark your interest. They can do something. Tell me about the frequency and type of engagement that actually added value to you versus like the groan of, oh, I got another call from this company that they're trying to sell me like value added reseller stuff and I just don't care anymore. Like what's the way that it actually was effective for you?
To me, the most effective way to do that, if I were on the other side, is you got to work from the bottom, right? You've got to understand the environment. You understand the sorts of pressures. I mean, going to the CIO and saying, we've got the best fill in the blank and we need you to talk to your staff, that's not effective. That, to me, that's putting my staff in a very, very interesting spot. They didn't have an opportunity to evaluate the technology. They didn't have an opportunity to ask the questions. They didn't have an opportunity to bring their staff in, whether their staff is federal or contractors, to have those questions to understand what kind of risk are we going to incur if we move forward with this, right? And so to me, going directly to the CIO, while, yes, it's nice to have meetings, I've always said you need to start with, the office directors, the division directors, the branch chiefs, the folks who are going to be dealing with that technology or that application or that system every day. They've got to feel comfortable with making a recommendation, because that's what I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for a recommendation coming from my senior staff on which way we should proceed. It's not Vaughn saying, well, looks like a great technology. Let's go ahead and, spend $1 million and bring it in and see how it works. I mean, to me, it's not fair to the folks within the organization who are one, you put them in the position to make those types of decisions or at least make those recommendations.
So in that environment, your staff, because they're techies, they're curious. Like, they're playing around with this stuff at home. They're researching, like, something new comes out, they're aware of it. Did you send them to conferences? Did you do you have like industry day? What was the dynamic to be able to get that kind of information?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get, certainly when I was in the office director role, when I was closer to the technology, they would go to conferences. Certainly we had contract relationships with a lot of the federal advisors on technology. And so we'd get information that way. And then we bring folks in. They'd come in and have conversations about their technology or their product. But again, I think a lot of it is the partnership between, and I say this, there's a partnership between the federal staff and contracting staff within any organization. And so there's a natural and a good dynamic that goes on between those two sides of the IT workforce.
That's right. Let me throw you a surprise question here, because of the current executive orders and the direction of like where IT is headed. So the overwhelming majority of my experience was dealing with your traditional system integrator, Beltway Bandit, and then some niche, subcontractors, some specialized something. And all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure for, either venture capital funded, non-traditional firms or, like entirely commercial firms. I know my opinion of it. Were you able to effectively interact with anyone that was like outside of the existing bubble where like they didn't know what SAM.gov was, they didn't know what, FISMA or an ATO was? Were you able to bring anything in that was like, I don't know, they're just random startup-y kind of thing, they have a really cool tech?
I don't know if it's random. Certainly we were very selective on who we sponsored for FedRAMP because we didn't have deep pockets, right? And so if you're talking about on that side, we certainly were very selective and partner with folks who would bring value, not only to us, but to the federal environments. And there was a couple instances where we partner with folks to bring them in because of the technology and how it fit certainly within our environment, and how we built a capability around that technology.
Did you have to convince them that it was worth the investment, or do we have to like fund them to get through the ATO process?
I think there's investment on both sides. I know there's an investment on both sides. If not in money, certainly in time, to make sure folks are able to hit their mark through the FedRAMP process. But it's still a significant investment on, when you look at what, especially new to the government, on the commercial side, if they want to engage the government, it's still a high bar for federal. I know they're working to improve it, but it still seems like it's a fairly high bar to get these. We talk about bringing in innovative ideas and technologies and ways of thinking. but it's still tough to engage because they're making a choice on where they're making an investment. Do I make an investment with the federal government who's got, this much opportunity, or do I make my investment on the commercial side where there's a, unbounded opportunity?
So, I mean, today, I know I own a company that does consulting for this. And one of my questions is like, CMMC just rolled out. Do I have to be CMMC level 2 compliant to subcontract to some company? Like, that's one of those like, oh man, that's going to be a lot of money.
It is. And I think, we set the bar higher and higher, and it becomes increasingly more difficult for folks to engage, right? So, do the innovative firms or companies, do they even get the light of the day, or are they just crushed before they even get an opportunity to engage?
All right. So you have recently retired. You're in that in between phase where you're still figuring out what it is that you want to do. But I troll you on check out your LinkedIn every once in a while, and I see, you still have opinions. You're throwing out there a lot of things about the TMF. For those who are the uninitiated, what is the TMF and why does it matter?
The Technology Modernization Fund was put out there back in 2018 as a result of what the Management Act, and so it was a way for government to start funding modernization efforts. Right? I think in principle it's great. I think when you look at, and I went and, as I write my opinion pieces, I went and actually, did the research on the 69, 70 projects that are out there. And, what I saw was a lot of these projects could have been internally funded through an agency working capital fund where you can continuously modernize it, because it's a fairly strict, rigid process to apply for TMF, to get it through the process, and then the oversight involved with executing on those TMF projects. And once you're done, once it's modernized in 5 years, are you going to go back to the TMF to modernize again? So there's got to be a different way of looking at it. I think there's a play for TMF and for the agency working capital funds. Certainly the TMF, I look at things no agency could do alone, right? So when you look at, and I'll use an example, login.gov, where it was supposed to be ubiquitous, not a single agency. It's supposed to be federal, a federalized authentication system. That made a lot of sense, right? For me to get a fund or get a TMF award for modernizing my switch infrastructure, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because in 5 years I'm going to be coming back again and asking for a loan. And that's where I think there's the role for the agency work capital funds, where we need to mature those, right? And allow the CIOs to actually leverage those funds to start doing that internal modernization. And they're not the big sexy projects. These are, how do I do my switch infrastructure? How do I update my laptops every 4 years? How do I make sure I've got mobile devices and the infrastructure to manage those mobile devices? How do I assure those are modernized repeatedly? And that's where the advantage of the agency working capital fund and why it's so important to mature those out. And I think the other thing behind the TMF is there's only so much money within the TMF, right? So, it should be a fund that used to award, and then you recover those dollars, and then you make the next award for some sort of large, cross-government initiative that needs to be modernized. And again, that's my opinion. And certainly opinions vary, but I think there's a place for both.
All right, so I'm going to take us in the direction of GSA and consolidation around common goods and services, because there's been a big ebb and flow inside of government, and we're currently in a phase of consolidation. So how many users did you have ballpark at EPA that you were the infrastructure provider of?
I mean, we supported both feds and non-feds contractors, so between 14 and 18,000 users.
So, I worked at GSA. The CIO there, David Shive, is an incredible man that does incredible work. there are probably other people out there that have been consistently in that job for a long period of time, but like he is my example of how you effectively run something that like can really be like new and modern. Like we were the first ones to use Google and Salesforce and a bunch of like different, like enterprise software products. So, earlier this year, there was a very strong push through via executive order to consolidate common goods and services to the point where there was the suggestion that, at first it was going to be GSA would be a shared service provider. Later, it softened to be more common purchasing for goods and services. But in terms of like scalability, if I had come to you when you were in your seat as CIO and say GSA is going to provide your dial tone, your IP, and your laptop, and you're going to be in the same environment as GSA, what would you have immediately said to me?
So I'm not going to give you the answer I think you're expecting. I would have said, hey, let's have a conversation about that, because I truly believe there's stuff that we're doing that we need to get out of the business of, right? There's things that historically, has been in the portfolio. And then as soon as someone says, well, we want to do that for you, where people are like, oh, wait a second, we've been doing it so long. We went through that same sort of thing when I was back in facilities. I said, why are we still printing our own PIV cards? Why are we still worrying about card stock and doing all this stuff? There's a service of a GSA that will print those and deliver those to us. We can get out of the business. And that was a difficult conversation with folks who've been doing that for a while. But what ultimately happened is, we increased performance, and I dare say, I think we probably decreased our costs associated with how we manage the PIV cards and in that side. I think there's other things, where we should get out of the business. I was kind of tongue in cheek one time at a meeting. I said, there's very few agencies that are worried about their plumbing, right? They don't worry about their water pipes and, their sewage. That's handled by GSA or, the buildings people. I said, at some point in the future, our switch infrastructure within buildings is going to be considered part of the building, where we shouldn't be worrying about managing that. Someone else is taking care of that. And I think there needs to be serious thought about that, because we're evolving into that environment where, do I really need to worry about what switch manufacturer is in my building, or do I need to worry about when I plug in, can I get to where I'm going? Can I get to the cloud services? Can I get to, my email? Can I get to that stuff? So I think there's a common nexus there. And I think it's going to evolve. I think you're going to start seeing that. I mean, there's already models out there in the world where people come into a building, they plug in, they don't worry about the infrastructure. They're there to work, and when they're done for the day, they pack up and go away. I think you're going to have the same sort. I think you're going to have the same sort of thing within the federal government, where we pay less of a premium, if you will, on delivering those services, and start looking at where are the higher value services, where are the mission services that we need to be focused on, because some of that stuff just gets in the way. It gets in the way of the agencies executing on what their true mission is. And the true mission, I dare say, when I was at DPA, the mission of the DPA wasn't to deliver, a mobile device. We needed a mobile device to support the mission, but do we need to do all the other stuff? Probably not.
So if you were, back in the seat, and there were things that, like, what, I'd be open to that conversation. To give me the ones you're like, what we could do, like this hardware, this software, this, kind of. What are the ones that are like, immediately we'd have that conversation where you where's the line where like, we'd have to think about that. Like, what's the easy ones versus the boundary where like there's really some uniqueness to the environment that we probably couldn't give up.
I think before I would have that conversation, and it goes back to a conversation we had just a little while ago on oversight and accountability, right? And as long as that there was genuine oversight and accountability for whoever was providing that service, then I think it's fair game for whatever it is, right? If it's, hey, just give me your money and we'll deliver something, I think that's a different conversation. And again, part of this is building trust within organizations and across organizations. And once you develop that trust, then the conversation becomes about what you're willing to give up. Again, I don't think that there's any sacred cows, if you will, within federal IT. I don't look at it that way. I look at, if we're not doing this, then someone can spend their time doing something that may be a little higher value, more mission aligned. Where can we focus them at?
Yeah. So for me, user inside of GSA, my starting place was always laptop, mobile device, network access, Wi-Fi, basic operations. That's the kind of thing that, nobody needs to be buying their own laptops, doing their own images, their own kind of stuff anymore. When you start tinkering with the software that I use in order to be effective, you're affecting my mission. When the decision-making authority says, we're going to change from software X to software Y, and you, the users, are going to bear the operational brunt of it because we're going to save money on an IT side, that's where I start having the worry that the central authority is making decisions that isn't in the interest of the mission. That's where I've always had the difficulty.
I would agree with that. I mean, that's, that's one of the things that we had to do at the EPA is, we didn't always deliver all the laptops to the end users. There was a time where the regions did their own acquisition and they managed their own images. And it was over time where it just became the smart, right thing to do is to centrally manage that, right? And that's, again, part of that was oversight and accountability.
So what of the significant changes that's happened in federal government and just in terms of like resourcing? So there have been significant departures from staff, like staffing levels at all offices. In my old office, I'm sure your office had some, like there are fewer feds today than there were a year ago. When you have the luxury of having talented people around you, it's relatively easy to be thoughtful and plan and make great decisions about like, where we're going to try to take some risks, where we're going to be innovative. When you suddenly have a decline, then it's like all hands on deck. Then it's just like, we just have to deliver the service and continue to just survive. Does that impact the likelihood of being innovative or introducing new technology? Like what's the window right now is like, right now, just continue to operate. It's not going to like you couldn't suddenly replace the principal IT infrastructure at EPA with a brand new acquisition with a brand new technical solution while you're in the middle of the current vibe, right?
Right. Yeah, I think your appetite for risk has gone way down. Right. Those, those folks who were in the workforce 9 months ago, they'd been there for a while. They'd seen it, they'd done it. They had an appetite for a little bit of risk. I think now people are adverse to risk, even now more than ever, probably because any little failure is just magnified, right? And I know, and I've got another thought piece coming up on risk and things like that. I think it becomes much more difficult now for folks to start taking those risky things on. And I'll put air quotes around the risk, whatever that risk may be. I think now, people need to focus on where am I going to, smartly modernize and decrease the amount of risk, around that, right? As we get new folks in the roles, are they going to be looking for, like you said, am I going to replace the entire, email infrastructure, right? Am I going to switch vendors? That's a fairly risky proposition. And it takes a lot of planning. Or am I going to do something mission adjacent and say, I'm going to focus on this little thing right here is where I'm going to cut my teeth on risk, right? Because, it's going to be huge if it succeeds. It's going to be tolerated if it's not hugely successful. And I think that's what folks are going to be looking for right now. But I don't know, it's going to be interesting over the next, several months to see, especially as we start looking at newer technologies that people are clamoring for. That I think people are just getting, certainly technologies associated with AI. There's a ton of stuff out there, a ton of stuff coming at us. There's, a lot of opportunity, but there's also that risk, and it's the risk appetite that I think folks are going to have to get around.
You want to hear a fun anecdote about that?
Sure.
All right. So during the everyone went virtual COVID window, all of a sudden there was a massive increase in the need to have, Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or whatever, like, the build up the infrastructure for video. And there were, still some people that were working in office.
Mm-hmm.
And the bane of my existence has been like federal conference rooms where we have a camera and a bar at the end of the room and you see the table, but you like the virtual versus in-office dynamic has always been terrible. And at that time, I saw a commercial device called an owl. It's a little camera. It's in the middle of the room. Looks like an owl. Has 2 eyes. And it shows like a live view in the room, and it moves around. Well, it'd be able to drive. I'm like, well, that's great. I want to let's try one out. It's like under a credit card purchase. It's super easy to buy. Plugs into your laptop. It doesn't connect to your network. It's just an IP device. We try it out. We love it. It's great. It makes our meetings so much more effective.
Yeah. Dun, dun,
And
dun.
then the IG investigates because the product was not either TA or BAA compliant, and it actually led to like a congressional like a hearing over it, where my CIO then got just publicly trashed over it. It wasn't entirely my decision, but it's largely my decision. Like, you want to hang the banner of non-compliance on somebody, it was on me. I made that decision because I knew that I had the backing of my CIO. I had the backing of the administration. Today, I don't buy that out. Today, I know that there's too much cost for risk for it. And so like if they're saying, hey, use this new generative AI tool, use this new thing, there are all sorts of magic things I could do in 2026 with evaluating proposals, rolling out like quick, like requirement generation. And my reaction today would be like, I don't know if I should put this in here. They said I should, but what if it gets out? What if like I use the wrong form? What if I do the wrong thing? Like, that's the whole risk dynamic of like the tools and whether or not you're backed by your leadership.
Yeah. What's interesting is, though, I think it's going to happen whether it's sanctioned or not. I think, you're going to have staff who are, they've already embraced these tools. They could be new staff who are coming out of college who have embraced these tools within their college or their non-professional life, and they're going to want these tools. That's what we hear time and time again is, hey, I had it. Why can't we get it? Right. And so there's always that tension between why can't we have it? And there, always, map back to some sort of rule or regulation or risk tolerance that basically said we can't have that. And yeah, I mean, there's even back when I was in, there was, the opposite the risk appetite, because I read the same things you read on the OWL device that goes way down. Like, why do I want to do that?
But like, let's think about like the rules that you had for your data. Like, there's this new controlled unclassified, stuff that everything's got to be marked. It looks almost like it's classified. Every contractor thing you ever get says proprietary on it. Can you take that and, I know that there's, some movement inside of the government to have, like approved AI models. But I mean, my kids, they'll take whatever document they have, throw it into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever else, and like say, summarize this. All of the tools that my Adobe says summarize this. Like, can you just take your data and just throw it in the tool and think we're not going to get in trouble? Like, this feels like we're gonna see some bad things come out of this.
I think I agree that we're going to see some bad things come out of it. That's why I think what we need to be aggressive on how we adopt it, because folks are going to find a way to use these tools, whether we think they're going to or not, or because we say don't use it. We know how that works. People want to do their jobs faster, better, cheaper. I mean, and these tools allow them to do that. So they can focus on the other parts of their job that require, maybe a non-AI tool to do the work.
So Vaughn is the CIO of the government next year. Do you use commercial AI tools? Do you have a hosted environment that's safe that we have like some sort of firewall or line in between? Like, what's like the sandboxy way that you would start doing something like this?
The answer is it depends. It sounds like a very lawyerly response, and I had a lot of lawyers at EPA that would say that, and I always get frustrated. I think it depends. It depends on the mission of the agency. I mean, I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think we've got several federal agencies that it's going to be sandboxed, and the type of data they're dealing with, it's got to be a very controlled environment. There's other parts of the government that may not require that level. Right, we see that already today between CMMC on the DoD versus non-DoD. Yes, it's going to eventually make its way, but the same requirements are there. I think you're going to see the same sort of thing. We're going to have to we're going to have to tolerate it in some respects.
So
I think,
this is like the low, medium, high kind of thing. Like if
yeah,
it's environmental data or it's food safety data, it's all right, you're allowed to use this type of tool, and if it's law enforcement data, then you're not.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. I think you have to segment it. Again, segmenting introduce expense too, right? So we're going to have to have different environments for different data types, and that's going to generate different costs.
All right.
Are you going to ask a tough question like should GSA? I was pretty jazzed, early in the administration when they said GSA was going to do all the IT procurement. I'm like, yes. I live with you all for many years through its EPA, through one of the large contracts we had. And early in my career at EPA, the first contract we worked with you all, with Fed San Juan, the very next one we took in-house. You probably remember that.
Yeah.
And after that, I think the one after that, we said, we're going back out to GSA. And there was always the tension between, wow, it's the cost. I'm like, well, the cost is what the cost is. You're going to pay it either way, whether you bring it in-house or not. And my opinion was GSA does this as a course of business. We do it every 5 to 7 years. So it's not part of, what we do on the mission side. Now, certainly for mission contracting, yeah, EPA should have a focus on the mission contracting, but buying IT services, I was fine with outsourcing that all to GSA.
Directionally, it's the right choice.
Mhm.
Operationally, it would take a long time to be effective. So I've lived there.
Yeah, it's you got to ease into it. For me though, and where we were with EPA, I was comfortable with it. We were already at the point where we could move away because we already had that relationship with GSA. I dare say other federal agencies are probably not in the same spot where they could have done that. Again, we were at a different spot.
And so the new administration came in. I'm briefing a number of them on like the way in which the math works, and we charged a fee. Like it was non-appropriated. And I can tell you this is a universal truth. This is true in your personal life. When you see a percentage added to something, you get mad about it. Like, it's like the tip box at the store. Like, like when you make something explicit, then you question whether it has value. And I am 100% on the side that GSA has to charge in order to have the accountability that you were describing under the working capital fund for the board. If it were an appropriation, the way that GSA operated in the 70s and 80s, you would not get the level of service that they provide today. So, trying to explain that if you're going to expand GSA's role in common good services, they're going to provide all the laptops. Their starting place today, this new OCAS office, will be to establish contracts that are kind of like the self-service contracts, like a giant blanket purchase agreement for the laptop providers that will allow for each agency to continue to operate. Over time, you could then consolidate. Then you could say, all right, we're gonna standardize on a certain number of models, certain number of images. Like you could get to where it could be an outsourced provider where GSA could be that shared services environment, but you'd have to have like a 3-year plan. You'd have to assess everyone's number of users and the shipping locations and like just to do that one and nothing else. Pick up that one singular rock.
Yep.
Would be a massive improvement in the way in which the federal government operates, and just committing to that versus saying, oh yes, we're also then going to do all the cell phones and all the circuits and all like the scale of that type of change would be incredible. It would just take years. So everyone who thinks this is going to happen, like because it was an executive order, is going to happen next year, until Congress appropriates the money directly to GSA, it's not happening.
I think the other part of this is organizations have to be willing to ride the bumps, right? You got to be able to weather the storm. We'll throw these all out there. And I wrote another article. We tried that, it didn't work, and it drives me crazy because that basically stops. Like we tried that with GSA, it didn't work, which means we'll never try it again, right? Because that's what happened. Versus, hey, we need to work this through, right? We need to ride this out. We need to, make sure that we address whatever the bumps in the roads are and move through it. I think sometimes when it gets hard, people throw their hands up and say, oh, we'll revert back. We won't do this. Maybe there'll be some, tool in the future that allow us to do that. Versus, let's just grin and bear it and move through the process. And I think that's what folks need to do is they just need to work through it, work through the pain of transformation, right? And that's sometimes the only thing we've got to do is work through the pain of transformation.
Yep. And you would need to have top level organizational leadership commitment that they're going to see it through, and continuity for the months to years it takes to execute it. The chaos will allow any failure to be like, all right, told you it wasn't going to work, and now I take everything and go home. Yeah, that is bureaucracy 101. The knives come out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, they're going to transcend any individual administration, right? So you've got to be able to work through. Well, we'll just wait it out. We're going to get a new administration in, and then we can make a different decision. There's got to be something that, like you said, there's a forcing function to work through it. What is that? And is it legislative that forces the working through it, which would transcend the administrations?
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation, Vaughn. I am glad that you became a CIO and I did not. I feel as though we both ended up in the right seats versus the direction that I was heading. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, wants to interact, is LinkedIn the best way to do it?
Yeah, I think hit me up through LinkedIn. That would be great.
All right. Well, this has been the Optimize podcast by VisibleThread, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.